The night I called a man I barely knew and asked him to come get me. I was sitting on the floor of a gas station bathroom in Barrie, Ontario, with a busted lip and $43 in my account. I remember the fluorescent light above the sink flickering every few seconds. I remember the smell of industrial cleaner and something underneath it that I didn't want to think about. I remember staring at my phone screen for so long that it locked itself, went dark, showed me my own reflection. Spit lip, mascara tracked down both cheeks, hair half pulled out of the elastic I'd put in that morning before work. I scrolled past my sister's name. She'd just had the baby, and I couldn't. I scrolled past my mother. She'd say I told you so before she even heard the full story. And I knew it, and I couldn't handle that either. I scrolled past friends I'd slowly stopped seeing over the past 2 years, one by one, the way you don't notice a drawer emptying until one day you reach in and there's nothing left. I stopped on a name I almost never called, Mr. Ashford. He was my employer, technically. I worked as a paralegal at Ashford Bridger, a firm that handled commercial litigation for clients whose names showed up on the financial pages of the Globe and Mail. I'd been there 3 years. I was good at my job. Organized, quiet, reliable. The kind of employee you don't really see until she doesn't show up. I had his number because he'd given it to the whole team at the retreat last fall. If you ever need anything, he'd said, the way people say things they don't always mean. He was 38, ran the firm with his partner Julian Bridger, wore dark suits that looked expensive without announcing themselves, and had a reputation in the office for being icily efficient and almost impossible to read. Some of the other paralegals were afraid of him. I had never been afraid of him, exactly. I just never felt like I knew which version of him I was getting on any given day. I pressed call before I could talk myself out of it. It rang twice. Ashford. My voice broke. I hadn't expected it to. I pressed my hand to my mouth for a second and tried again. It's Tessa. Tessa Morrow. From the firm. A pause. Not a long one. Where are you? Not what's wrong or why are you calling or any of the things I'd braced for. There's a Petro-Canada off Dunlop Street. I'm in the bathroom. I exhaled. I didn't know who else to call. Another pause. Shorter. Stay inside. Don't unlock the door for anyone. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He was there in 14. I should start from the beginning, because the bathroom at the Petro-Canada was not the beginning. The beginning was 2.5 years earlier, at a house party in Liberty Village. The kind with a charcuterie board, the size of a coffee table, and a Spotify playlist curated to make everyone feel like they were in a movie about people who had their lives together. His name was Dominic. Not the Dominic on my list. A different one I'd met at that party, one who'd laughed at every single thing I said for 3 hours straight and made me feel like I was the most interesting person in any room I'd ever entered. He was in tech sales, drove a leased BMW, had a story for everything and told all of them well. I was 27. I was lonely in a way I hadn't admitted to myself yet. I said yes to a second date, and then a third, and by the time I understood who he actually was, I had already rearranged my life around him in all the small ways that are hard to walk back from. The first time he grabbed my wrist hard enough to bruise, he cried after. He said he didn't know what had come over him. He said he was under enormous pressure at work, and that he'd never done anything like that before, and that he was so sorry, so genuinely sorry, and I believed him because I wanted to believe him, and because the version of him that held my face in his hands and apologized felt as real as everything else. The problem with people like Dominic is that they are real. That's what nobody tells you. The person who loves you and the person who hurts you are the same person, and you spend years trying to work out which one is the performance, until you can't remember anymore which one you were in love with in the first place. By the time I called Mr. Ashford from that bathroom floor, I had quietly lost most of my savings to emergency loans that were not emergencies, and to rent on an apartment that was technically both of ours, but practically mine. I had canceled plans with my sister so many times that she'd stopped inviting me. I had learned to read Dominic's moods the way a meteorologist reads pressure systems, not to predict sunshine, but to forecast the severity of the storm. That night the storm had found me at the firm's underground parking lot, which was where I'd been standing when he appeared out of nowhere. Smelling like he'd been drinking since noon, he wanted money. I didn't have it. He got his hand around my arm, and then the side of his ring caught my mouth when I pulled away, and then a car turned into the lot and he let go and I walked. I did not run. I walked very carefully and normally. To the stairwell, and then up to the street. And then 4 blocks to the gas station, because it was the first lit-up place I could see. That's when I called. He didn't ask questions on the drive back. He put the heat on, even though it wasn't that cold out, and he handed me a travel pack of tissues from the glove compartment, without saying anything. And he drove with both hands on the wheel, like a man who was making sure he did not do anything alarming, when he was clearly very alarmed. I stared out the passenger window at the highway lights smearing past. "You don't have to take me home," I said, because home was the apartment and Dominic had a key. "I know," Mr. Ashford said. "I'm not." He drove me to a Marriott near the waterfront. He walked in with me, spoke to someone at the front desk, and handed over a credit card. Then he turned and said, "The room is in my name, he can't access the reservation. You can stay as long as you need. There's a Shoppers Drug Mart 2 blocks east." I looked at him. "I'll pay you back." Something crossed his face that I couldn't identify. "You won't," he said. "Don't worry about that." And then he was gone. I took 3 days off work. I told HR it was a family matter, which wasn't technically a lie. I filed a police report. The officer who took my statement, a woman with tired eyes and a very steady voice, told me what I could and couldn't expect from the process, and she said it plainly and without softening it in a way I actually appreciated. I knew the process would be slow. I knew Dominic would hire someone decent and make me out to be unstable. I knew none of this would be clean, but I filed. I also called my sister. She cried. I hadn't expected that, either. I'd been bracing for the lecture. The "why didn't you tell me?" the recounting of every red flag she'd seen and I'd waved off. Instead, she just cried and said, "Tell me what you need." I didn't know yet, but it was the right question. When I came back to the firm, things were normal, or almost normal. I caught Mr. Ashford watching me from across the open office once, the way you catch someone before they realize you've seen them, and he looked away. I didn't bring up the hotel. He didn't either. We went back to operating at a professional distance, which was what I told myself I wanted. His full name was Garrett Ashford. I learned that from the firm's website, which I had read perhaps a dozen times over 3 years, without registering his first name as something that belonged to a person. He had done his undergrad at Queen's, his law at Osgood, had made partner at 34. His assistant described him to new hires as extremely high standards, not unkind, don't take it personally. He ran twice a week along the lakeshore and drank black coffee and had, as far as I could tell, almost no personal life that wasn't somehow adjacent to the firm. I thought about him more than was reasonable. I told myself it was gratitude. 3 weeks after I came back, Dominic showed up. Not at the firm, exactly. He was smarter than that. He was across the street, sitting in the BMW, which technically I knew he couldn't afford the lease on anymore, watching the front door. I saw him from the second-floor window, where the photocopier was. I stood there for a while with a stack of documents in my hands, and my heart doing something complicated. Then I went back to my desk and sent an email. I titled it "Potential Security Concern, wanted to make you aware," and I wrote 4 sentences explaining what I'd seen, professional and clinical, the way I'd been trained to draft correspondence that didn't editorialize. Garrett responded in under 2 minutes. "Don't go downstairs. I'll be right there." He came to my desk and I showed him the window. The BMW was still there. Garrett looked at it for a moment with an expression I couldn't read, and then he said, very quietly, "Does he know this is where you work?" "He's known for 2 years. Something shifted in his face. Not anger, exactly. It was more controlled than that, and in some ways that made it more unsettling. "Go back to your desk," he said. "I'll handle it. You don't need to, Tessa." It was the first time he'd used my first name, not Ms. Morrow, not even a formal acknowledgement. Just my name, like it was the most natural thing, like he'd been saying it for years. "Go back to your desk." I went back to my desk. I don't know exactly what happened on the street. I know that Garrett went out the front door and crossed without looking both ways, which I noticed from the second-floor window, because I had definitely gone back to look. I know that the 2 of them spoke for approximately 4 minutes. I know that Dominic drove away and did not come back that day, or the next, or the one after that. When Garrett returned to the office, he walked past my desk and placed Tim's card beside my keyboard without breaking stride. I turned it over. A lawyer's name, a firm I recognized as one that handled restraining orders and civil protection cases. On the back, in Garrett's handwriting, already spoken to them, "Your file is open." I held the card for a long time. The protection order took 6 weeks to finalize. During that time, Garrett, and somewhere in there he had become Garrett to me, at least inside my own head, made no reference to any of it at work. He was the same as always, precise, focused, occasionally intimidating in the way of someone who simply operates at a frequency most people aren't accustomed to. He reviewed my work on the Hartwell file and told me it was the cleanest brief he'd seen from a paralegal in 5 years, and he said it matter-of-factly, without flourish, which somehow made it mean more. I started noticing things I hadn't let myself notice before. The way he remembered details, not just case details, but small things. That I took my coffee with oat milk because the building's regular milk didn't agree with me. That I had a physiotherapy appointment every other Thursday that made me 15 minutes late, and he had quietly moved the team's standing meeting to accommodate it without saying why. That when I came in one morning looking like I'd had no sleep, he sent an email at 8:47 a.m., rerouting 2 of my afternoon files to other staff and adding, "Take the afternoon. The Linden brief can wait until Monday." I wasn't used to someone noticing. Dominic had trained me out of expecting it. One Thursday evening in November, I was still at my desk at 6:30 because the Linden brief actually couldn't wait until Monday. I'd underestimated the turnaround. Almost everyone had left. I heard footsteps and looked up to find Garrett with his coat already on, keys in hand, and he stopped in the doorway of the bullpen. "You haven't eaten," he said. "I'll grab something on the way home. There's a Thai place 2 blocks north. They're open until 8. I looked at him. "Are you asking me to dinner, Mr. Ashford?" He looked back at me, and for the first time I saw something flicker in his expression that was not professional composure. Something that was, if I was reading it right, almost rueful. "I'm observing that you haven't eaten, and that there is food nearby," he said carefully. "But yes, I suppose I am. I saved my document, I got my coat. We talked for 2 hours, not about the firm, not about Dominic, not about any of the things that had brought us into each other's orbit in the first place. We talked about where we'd grown up, him in Halifax, me in Kingston, and about the specific experience of moving to Toronto in your 20s, and finding it both enormous and strangely lonely. He ordered pad thai and ate it like someone who has been to this particular restaurant many times before, and knows exactly what they want. He asked me what I'd studied before the paralegal program, and I told him philosophy, and he didn't laugh or ask what I planned to do with that. He just said, "That explains the briefs," and I asked him what he meant, and he said, "You structure arguments the way philosophers do. You anticipate the counterpoint before you make the claim." I had never had someone describe my work that way before. I had never had someone pay that particular kind of attention. Walking back to the subway, the November air cutting sharp off the lake, he matched my pace without making it obvious. At the entrance to Union Station, he stopped and said, "This helped. Tonight, I'm glad you didn't leave." "I almost did," I admitted. "I almost said I was fine and went home." "I know," he said. "That's why I asked instead of offering." I thought about that on the train all the way to Bloor. I want to be honest about the months that followed, because I think people often tell these stories in a way that makes the progression seem inevitable. Like, of course she fell for him. Of course it happened. But it wasn't like that for me, because I had spent 2 years having my own sense of reality slowly dismantled, and what I'd gotten back in its place was a kind of carefulness I didn't know how to set down. Garrett seemed to understand this without me saying it. He didn't push, he didn't test, he showed up consistently in small ways, the rerouted files, the remembered oat milk, the card left face down on my desk, and he did not ask for acknowledgement or reciprocation. He seemed to have made a decision and was content to let me take my time arriving at my own. I got my own apartment in February, a 1-bedroom in the Junction. My sister came over with a bottle of Prosecco and a set of towels from Hudson's Bay, and we sat on the floor of the empty living room, and she told me she was proud of me, and I cried properly for the first time since it had ended. I started therapy the same month. My therapist's name was Bonnie, and she was not warm in a performative way, but in a steady, reliable way that I came to count on. She asked me, in our 3rd session, what I was most afraid of now that Dominic was out of my life. I said, I'm afraid I don't know the difference anymore. Between someone who's safe and someone who just hasn't shown me yet that they're not, she said. That's a reasonable thing to be afraid of. Let's talk about how we'd know. I told Garrett, in March, that I had feelings for him and that I was not ready to act on them, and that I wanted him to know both of those things so that he wasn't operating in the dark. We were walking along the waterfront after work, which had become a semi-regular thing, the kind of thing that had evolved without either of us naming it. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, watching the lake. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "That's it?" He looked at me sideways. "What would you like me to say?" "I don't know. Something. Most people would say something." "Most people would say what they think you want to hear," he said. "I'd rather say what's true." He paused. "I'm not going anywhere. I have no interest in anyone else. And I understand that trust takes time, and that I haven't fully earned yours, and that I would like the opportunity to do that if you'll let me." The lake was doing that thing it does in early spring, restless and gray and enormous, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I had been holding tight for a very long time. "Okay," I said. "Okay. Don't push it," he smiled. It was, I had come to realize, a rare thing, not a performance, not deployed for effect, just a real smile, which he apparently saved for occasions that warranted it. Dominic did not disappear quietly. That would have been too simple. In April, I received a legal notice claiming I owed him $12,000 in shared household expenses, a number that was completely fabricated and structured to look, on paper, like a plausible dispute. I sat with that letter for about 40 minutes. Then I scanned it and sent it to the lawyer Garrett had set me up with, and I sent a copy to Garrett and I went to bed. Garrett called me at 7:48 the next morning. He hired someone, he said, without preamble. They're going to try to make this a civil matter to create nuisance pressure. It won't go anywhere. But it'll take a few months. I know. Are you all right? The fact that he asked it like that, not "are you okay," but "are you all right," which for some reason felt more serious, more like he actually wanted the real answer, made something in me soften. "I will be," I said. "That's what I thought," he said. The case was dismissed in June. Dominic's lawyer had apparently concluded that the potential payoff was not worth the evidentiary problems, and the whole thing collapsed without ceremony. I found out on a Tuesday afternoon via a very short email from my lawyer, and I sat at my desk and felt not triumphant exactly, but lighter, like I'd put something down that I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten I was carrying it. I went home that evening and called my sister, and then I called Garrett. "It's done," I said. "A beat. I know, your lawyer copied me. You didn't say anything. I wanted you to call when you were ready. Another beat. How are you feeling?" "Like I want to go somewhere," I said. "Somewhere that isn't here." "Where?" I thought about it. "Somewhere with good food and water I can look at. I don't know. Nova Scotia, maybe." He was quiet for a moment. "I have a family property in Lunenburg," he said, carefully. "It's been closed up since December, but you'd like it, if that's something you'd want." I sat with that for a second. "Are you asking me on a trip, Garrett?" "I'm observing that you want to go somewhere, and that I know of a location. You literally said that exact thing about the Thai food." "It worked then," I laughed. "A real one, the kind that catches you off guard." I pressed my hand over my mouth for a second, not to stop it but just to feel it, just to notice that I was doing it, that I was here, in my own apartment, with light coming through the windows I'd chosen and curtains I'd hung myself, laughing. "Okay," I said. "Lunenburg." We drove down in late July, through Quebec and into New Brunswick and across. The kind of drive that takes a day and a half if you don't rush, and you shouldn't rush because the country is too big and too good-looking to blast through without stopping. Garrett drove in silence for long stretches, but it was never uncomfortable. It was the silence of someone whose company you don't need to fill. I put on playlists and fell asleep somewhere, past Fredericton, and woke up to late afternoon, light slanting golden through the window and the smell of salt. The house in Lunenburg was everything I hadn't known to picture. Old, in the way that old things are beautiful without trying to be. Wide windows facing the harbor. A kitchen with blue-painted cabinets, and a gas stove that took some learning. A porch where the Adirondack chairs had weathered to the color of driftwood. The first evening, we sat on that porch with a bottle of wine Garrett had brought from a vineyard in the Annapolis Valley, and watched the fishing boats come in, and neither of us said much. And it was the most comfortable I had felt in longer than I could name. "I owe you something," I said eventually. He looked over. "You don't. Not money. I stopped. Tried again. I've been careful, for a long time, very careful, about what I let in, about what I let myself believe. And you've been patient with that, and you've never once made me feel like I was a problem to be solved or a situation to be managed. And I want you to know that I know that I see it." Garrett set down his glass. He turned to look at me in a way he had, fully, like he was giving you his complete attention and you were not allowed to look away. "You called me from a gas station bathroom," he said. "You didn't know me well enough to expect anything from me, and you called anyway. That tells me something about who you are when you're afraid and still moving. I didn't do anything anyone decent wouldn't have done. What took courage was you." I looked at him. "I call you Bright Spark," he said. "Inside my head. I've never told you that. Bright Spark? From the moment you started at the firm. The quality of your thinking. It's like watching something catch and illuminate." He paused. It seemed presumptuous to say. I thought about the fluorescent light in that bathroom. Flickering. The smell of industrial cleaner. $43 in my account and my own face in the dark screen. "Say it," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. "Bright Spark," he said quietly. I reached over and took his hand. He turned it over and held mine, steady and unhurried, and we watched the harbor go silver in the last of the light. I'm not going to tell you it was easy after that, because it wasn't, not entirely. Healing doesn't run in a straight line, and neither does learning to trust someone new, even someone who has given you every reason to. There were nights I woke up rigid with old fear, reaching for a threat that wasn't there. There were moments in arguments, real ones, about small things, logistics and miscommunication, and the ordinary friction of two people figuring out how to share their lives. When I felt the old instinct kick in, the one that told me to make myself small, to concede immediately, to say I'm sorry before I'd even assessed whether I'd done anything wrong. Garrett never let me do that unchecked. Not in a forceful way, just in the way of someone who pays attention. He'd stop, in the middle of whatever small dispute we were in, and say, "You don't have to do that with me." Meaning, you don't have to disappear. You can stay in the room. I learned to stay in the room. My sister got married the following May, a small ceremony at a vineyard outside Niagara on the lake. I was her maid of honor, and I gave a toast that made her cry and made Garrett, sitting 3 tables back, look at me with an expression that I had by then learned to read. Quiet, unhurried pride. Afterward, on the drive home along the QEW with the lake dark and enormous to the right, and the lights of the city beginning to accumulate on the horizon, Garrett reached over without looking away from the road and found my hand. "You were wonderful tonight," he said. "The toast wasn't that good. The toast was good. But I meant all of it. I've been watching you rebuild something this past year that someone worked very hard to take apart, and tonight it showed, all the way through." I didn't say anything, just held his hand and watched the lights. He proposed 6 weeks later, on the porch in Lunenburg, the Adirondack chairs. No announcement, no grand gesture. He had the ring in his jacket pocket, and he waited until we were quiet, until the harbor was silver gray in the evening, and then he said, "I want to be the person who gets to see all of it, the parts you're afraid of and the parts you're proud of, and the ordinary parts in between. I'd like to be that person for a very long time if you'll let me." I looked at him. "Bright Spark," he said softly. "Will you marry me?" The harbor, the driftwood chairs, the smell of salt and evening and the long drive that had brought us both here, from Halifax and Kingston and all the in-between places, to this porch, to this question. "Yes," I said, and I meant it like I had never meant anything in my life.